Hello, everyone. My name is Erica, and our group's assigned actor is Mexico. So I will be explaining the problem by beginning with a brief history of Mexico's political party, starting with the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or also known as in Spanish, Partido Revolucionario Institucional. They have held power in the country for up to 71 years. During its reign, the PRI were known as the Mexican Miracle, and they had a period of economic growth through substitution of imports and low inflation spurred, successful national development. However, this, of course, progressively there is a decline. Due to the economic disparity between classes and the unequal distribution of wealth. So PRI lost to the opposition party, PAN, known as the National Action Party, which occurred in the late 20th century. At this time of transition is when it can be observed Mexico's evolving into really incrementally into an electoral democracy. And during this time, of course, there were changes within the political parties and the structure of the government itself. That in which, of course, at the time was led unorganized, leading individual citizens to take over, government positions and supplying the need of the people. Next slide. So moving forward into today's government, it is currently in the midst of a worsening security crisis due to the explosive clashes and territorial disputes among powerful drug trafficking organizations, which of course has not led only to killings among their competitors, but innocent Mexican citizens, along with other international citizens that may be involved with the organized crime within the country. Now, the current government is trying to deal with the issue by, trying to supply its individual states with funding. However, the allocation and distribution of these funds have really not been allocated precisely or equally distributed. Of course, there is corruption amongst government officials and police officers and departments, and has of course been discovered. Some of the government's funding has gone to the organized crime. Now, Mexico, of course, is now considered mostly in a constant state of emergency, which of course creates a problem in how the executive power tries to control the situation. And there's certain uneasiness because of how it was progressively trying to get into a democratic state, but somewhat now it's leading into a semi-authoritative state due to the executive power distributing its military within the country to try and control this crime that's occurring. Next slide. So, of course, this isn't just an issue within Mexico. This is also a United States issue because we are bordering countries. As you can see in the picture depicted, Uncle Sam is looking in Mexico and just saying, poor old Mexico, the violence won't stop until they stop the flow of the drugs. Funny thing is, of course, there is a demand and a supplier. The United States is the demander, and of course, Mexico is the supplier. There has been, coexistively working between both governments to try and stop this. However, due to Mexico being unable to control the organized crime and due to the internal corruption, it has been a rather tenuous task. But of course, the United States is another actor within this that should really take a little bit more of action towards the situation. As of course we'll discuss later on, I believe Alicia or Donald will touch upon that. Now the next slide. Okay. So basically just going off a little bit more on the U.S. and Mexico border relations. Like I said, there has been U.S. government assistance. However, there has been smuggling of weapons. The Mexico government, of course, has placed, gun control and trying to stop and remove illegal gun weaponry. However, many of these drug cartels, they come into the United States, they can easily obtain a gun. And even with our background checks, it kind of gets difficult because there is smuggling of weapons and then, of course, the smuggling back of drugs. A couple of high drug usage here within the United States, commonly known marijuana, heroin, and crack cocaine. Now, Mexico, of course, they're the main suppliers. They're, of course, dealing with their governmental corruption. And just to touch upon a couple of the drug cartels control their territories, most of the three commonly known are like the Juarez cartel, the Gulf cartel, and Los Zetas. Those three cartels are somewhat closer to the border and basically kind of control the main area within there. Now, the next topic we will be discussing is the importance of the issue, which Donald will then take over.
Good evening. My name is Donald, and I'll be talking about the significance of the drug war in Mexico and outlining the nature of the challenge that we face. On this slide on the right side is a map of cartel territories within Mexico. And as Erica just pointed out, there are several cartels that operate within the country, and each one of these cartels dominates in different parts of Mexico. One of the main sources of violence in the country is not just the fighting between cartels and the government, but also competition over territory and shipment routes for narcotics between these different cartels. And the fact that there are these different cartels operating in the country makes it difficult for the Mexican government to devise a single strategy for dealing with this problem, because each one of these cartels has its own character, it has its own advantages and disadvantages, strengths and weaknesses, and its own strategy. And so really, the government of Mexico, both at the national level and at the state level, needs to devise a fairly complicated strategy to deal with this problem, because it faces a number of different organizations that are involved in the drug trade. If we go to the next slide. So I think most of the people who will watch this video are quite familiar already with the extent of the criminality and the violence within Mexico. That tends to get most of the attention when we're talking about the drug war in Mexico, because the numbers are quite significant. At the end of 2016, the death toll in the country stood at 166,000, which actually makes this conflict one of the deadliest in the world. And that's fatalities over the last several decades, but still, that's quite a staggering number in terms of violence in the country. It's important to point out that over the last few decades, the cartels have actually become quite integrated into the Mexican economy in different parts of the country. So there are approximately 450,000 Mexicans that are currently employed by the cartels, and an additional 3.2 million Mexicans that benefit financially from narcotic smuggling in some way. And in a country that is still struggling with poverty and wealth inequality, the cartels can often provide an opportunity to improve quality of life just by providing employment. The annual profits of the Mexican drug cartels is about 25 to 30 billion, and that's profits. It's an enormous profitable business, frankly. And in some communities, especially along the U.S. border, For example, in Juarez, laundered drug money can actually be a significant part of the local economy. So one of the important points here is that the drug trade is actually quite integrated into daily economic life for millions of Mexicans. And that creates a challenge for coming up with solutions. If we go to the next slide. So Mexico is actually increasingly a market for the drug cartels, and drug abuse is now a growing public health problem. So historically, the rate of drug abuse in Mexico has been quite a bit lower than in the United States, but that's begun to change a bit. According to Mexico's national survey, drug use has actually increased by a significant amount, 87% from 2002 to 2011. And the share of Mexicans between the age of 12 and 65 who have used narcotics has grown by a significant amount over this time period as well. So this is not just a problem of criminality and violence. It's actually a growing public health crisis within Mexico. And the drug war represents a tremendous cost to the country and continues to be a burden on Mexico's economic development. The Institute for Economics and Peace has actually estimated that the annual cost of the drug war to Mexico's economy exceeds $134 billion each year. And it's a significant economic burden on the country, and is probably holding the country's economic growth back, its GDP growth back by at least 1%. So in addition to the level of violence that the country faces, this is a social, public health, and economic crisis as well. So I'll hand this over to Alicia now. She'll be discussing our proposed solutions for how to deal with some of these challenges.
So I'm going to tie in what Erica and Donald have both presented and propose a solution to Mexico's war on drugs. So in order for Mexico to be successful in its war on drugs, there has to be equal cooperation on both sides of the border between the United States and Mexico. The United States government, they need to treat Mexico as an equal partner in the fight on drugs. They need to realize that both countries benefit as working as partners. So Erica had shown a slide earlier, a political cartoon, and the importance on southern flowing traffic, meaning we need to stop the flow of illicit funds moving across the border, cash, guns, etc. That will then tighten the financial hardship on the drug cartels. The U.S. government should develop financial tools that they had put into place in order to stop terrorist organizations after the 9/11 attacks. This, in turn, will hurt the cartel's financing. So that is another strong issue that Mexico and the United States should work towards. The United States needs to ramp up drug education and treatment, as a reduction in demand would cut profits to the cartels. If people aren't using drugs, then the profits aren't going to the drug lords that are then trafficking the drugs into the United States. So when we cut off those profits, it cuts off the payoffs to corrupt officials. It will stop and hinder the drug cartels' movement. It will decrease their size. So that is a few ways that the United States can help in working with Mexico. Mexico decriminalized some possession of small amounts of cannabis and cocaine and other drugs that are currently listed in the UN conventions. However, that still has not stopped the drug cartels from moving drugs north of the border. The war on drugs is classified from the years 1971 to 2016. The post-war on drugs is from 2016 to the current times. However, I haven't seen that there's a so-called post-war on drugs. There just seems to still be a huge war on drugs that needs to be curtailed. The solution for Mexico's war on drugs, continued from the Mexico side standpoint, would be that Mexico needs to continue a hard stance on drug use, drug trafficking, the cartels. They have sent the Army into areas of high drug trafficking, and that seems to have helped to null some of the violence that has happened, like in Juarez and along other border towns. But that's temporary. That doesn't last. And so there needs to be further use of the military in those areas. They need to continue to challenge drug cartels. They need to push harder financially and legally against them. They need to expand economic assistance. If you offer economic assistance to impoverished areas, then those poor citizens wouldn't turn to the drug cartels to work for them. So that's another one. If they pursued an immigration policy with the United States that made sense, allowing workers to travel north of the border into labor scarce economic sectors in the United States, that would help to send money home so that others in their family or neighbors didn't need to work for the drug cartels. Mexico needs to enforce or create tougher asset forfeiture laws, removing funds and assets from those drug cartels. The Achilles heels for Mexico is the corruption. In an electoral democracy, it's destabilizing to them. The problem did not occur when there was an autocracy, and so taking the above measures would decrease corruption. The relationship is very delicate, and so Mexico and the United States do need to remember that as border sharing country, that the need to cooperate and not point fingers is really important. And if it remains a poor state, then those that are of less fortune are going to seek other means in order to advance economically. So definite expanded development of assistance rather than security assistance may be a better approach, an immigration policy, again, that makes more sense. And the U.S. policy needs to increase accountability, the expansion of social and economic opportunities, and to aid law enforcement to help to maintain a stable democracy in Mexico. So that is, in our slides, the problem as presented by Erica, the importance of the issue as presented by Donald, and the solution as presented to myself. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to any feedback.